Hey there folks, the #1 Maná fan from the Infinite Jukebox here with another entry in my Rock Hall Review series. What is the Rock Hall Review series, you may be asking? It's a yearly series that I do on this channel where I talk about each of the current year's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominees, review one album by each of them over the course of however long it takes me to do that before the inductees are announced, and then talk about whether I think they deserve to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and if I think they will be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Two questions that more frequently than you would expect have wildly different answers. And today I am talking about Mexican rock band Maná and their studio album Dónde jugarán los niños. I'm just gonna apologize for pronunciation now. Okay, let's get this out of the way now. Did I butcher the pronunciation of this album's title? Probably. Did I pass the one Spanish course that I took in high school with anything higher than a very low B? No, absolutely not. I cheated like hell in that class. So now here we are with Maná, one of the most commercially successful Mexican rock bands of all time, as well as the only artist on the list of nominees this year that I just straight up was not familiar with beforehand, and I would say it's pretty inarguable that they are the biggest wild card on the list of nominees this year. I mean, sure, some artists here like the Black Crowes or Fish are surprising because of how marginal they feel in terms of the general inductees list that you get every year, but, you know, Maná, I just don't think anybody in their right mind would have ever predicted them getting nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, especially since historically, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has never really cared about musicians outside of the United States. I mean, sure, we dip our toes into the UK very frequently, and somewhat into Canada, with even that kind of being a stretch depending on which way you look at it, but at the end of the day, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is a very United States-centered institution, and that means that bands that are culturally or commercially relevant in the United States are always going to have a leg up against acts that are not from or relevant to the United States. There's a reason that someone like John Mellencamp would always have a better shot of being inducted than, say, Oasis would or Robbie Williams would, because those are very UK-centered artists that struggle to either get inducted or get nominated because their cultural relevance in the United States just isn't that massive here compared to their home country. And when that's British artists having trouble getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you can only imagine how difficult it would be for an artist from Latin America to get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Latin America has pretty much never been on the Hall's radar in any capacity, no matter which of the inductee categories you look towards, and I mean, I have to give the Hall credit where credit is due. A few years back, they actually did try to kind of branch out and nominated arguably the single most influential musician to come out of the entire continent of Africa, Fela Kuti, a couple of times. He never actually got inducted, and I think it's a damn shame that he didn't, but he was nominated, and it was a major breakthrough for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's recognition of music from outside of the usual couple of countries that they tend to pick from. And one would hope that that would lead to some of the most influential artists from non-predominantly English-speaking countries to be nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and that just basically did not happen at all. But now here we are with Maná, a band that are seemingly the way that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame are trying to maybe get back on that track, introduce a larger audience to the institution, and maybe make it a bit more relevant on an international scale rather than a regularly national scale. However, where Kuti's nomination felt relevant and important and warranted due to the impact that he has kind of seen create for himself across the entire globe, the choice to nominate Maná of all bands just kind of feels a bit underwhelming, honestly. I don't really see why they really deserve it more so than any of the multitude of artists or bands that could have gotten the nod instead. Look, I was born and raised and live in the United States, and really I have no traditional cultural exposure to Mexican music. I think that's pretty obvious to point out here. I mean, I know a lot of the classics and a lot of the critically acclaimed underground records from Mexico throughout its storied history and its music industry, but the fact is that my exposure to music from outside of the English-speaking world is more often than not predominantly through other music nerds and music publications. So commercially successful artists that don't necessarily necessarily have the most positive reputation among that type of crowd. They tend to go under my radar, and most of the time I don't even know their names, let alone what they sound like, and I am more than happy to admit that I really was not at all familiar with Maná prior to having to make this video for this series. I didn't want to skip over them, but I knew nothing about them, especially compared to some of the other artists on this list that I know at least a fair bit about, generally speaking. And you know what? I didn't want to go into this totally blind, but I also didn't want to just listen to the music, because at that point I feel like I would be missing out on some commentary that I could make about their relevance on a larger scale. So I reached out to a couple of fellow music dorks from Mexico who are, you know, again, more traditionally exposed to their own culture, and, you know, ask them, hey, what does Maná represent to you? And to your country, generally speaking? Can you compare them to a band that was massive in the United States, so that I could basically get a grasp on what they represented within the Mexican music industry? And the three responses that I got back were Bon Jovi, Whitesnake, and Nickelback, and that did not instill faith in me whatsoever. And I was pretty correct in not having that much faith, because similar to most records put out by those bands, this is bad. This is really bad. This just feels like absolutely soulless stadium rock to me. I mean, I guess it does deserve some brownie points for attempting to earnestly incorporate some of the semi-reggae influences that bands like The Police had done prior to them much more successfully. But, you know, as a whole, honestly, that's about where it ends for me, as far as positive things go that I feel like I can say. I mean, this is just such a 2D album to me here, man. I'm sorry to any Mexican viewers I might have that grew up with this music and find it era-defining, and I'm sure that I probably would have different feelings if I had those same experiences, but, you know, as it stands, as an outsider here, the choruses here just feel like the most paint-by-the-numbers, late 80s, early 90s stadium rock. The instrumentals just have no edge to them overall, but at the same time, they feel too simplistic to be technically impressive in any way, and some very unremarkable and at times kind of muddy production leaves everything feeling just sort of dry and sonically unmoving. No real dynamicism going on here that makes it engaging to listen to, even in the moments where it falters a bit. The whole thing just feels like a bit of nothing to me. I mean, I'm sure that Maná have worse records than this overall. I didn't sit down and listen to everything that they put out. I just didn't feel like hitting that discography from front to back. I had different things to do, like watch paint dry and listen to Metal Machine music by Lou Reed, but as a whole, I'm noticing a striking similarity between this record and plenty of forgettable wannabe anthemic stadium acts that were popular throughout the United States in the 80s, very briefly into the early 90s, and the fact that this came out in 1992 kind of baffles me in a way, at least considering how popular it was. Again, I'm judging from the musical landscape of the United States in the early 90s rather than the musical landscape of Mexico in the early 90s, but it just feels baffling to me that this had as much commercial success as it ultimately did, because the only appeal I can see is hearing this in a very commercialized stadium kind of setting, and it just lacks any heart or real personality. There's just nothing going on here that feels all that remarkable. So, Dónde jugarán los niños? I'm going to give this record 2 stars out of 5. And now for the trickiest example of me doing a should they get in, will they get in kind of thing here is, should they get in? I don't really know, man. Like I said, I don't have the exposure to them historically to say, oh yeah, they really define an era of music, but based off of what I do know about them, they sort of have this sort of foreigner journey kind of status as a hugely commercially successful band that everybody knows that doesn't really get any critical acclaim, because at the end of the day, they didn't really have anything that set them apart from other stadium rock bands. They just happen to be more popular than most of them. And that's not inherently a bad thing, because I have nothing against Journey or even Foreigner being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for the most part. But as a whole, it also does make me wonder, do Maná deserve it more than the rest of the artists on this list? And the answer is no, I don't think so, personally. I mean, maybe, again, my perspective would be different if I was personally a little more deeply connected with their music, or was just more aware definitively of what they represent to the place that they came from. As it stands, though, I don't know. I don't really see it. I mean, as a whole, they are undeniably, objectively, one of the most commercially successful rock bands to come out of Mexico, but at the same time, I don't necessarily know if that means that they deserve it, at least at this point. Maybe if they were put into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame via different means, not on this particular ballot, on a different ballot, or through a side category, I wouldn't really care, but, you know, here, I don't know, next to, like, Joy Division / New Order, and Mariah Carey, and Cyndi Lauper, and Soundgarden, etc., I don't see it. I don't see why they would really have a necessity to be inducted over those artists, but then again, I could be completely off base, so I'm not going to say that as a definitive opinion that I hold to myself deeply or anything like that, because truthfully, I just don't really know. Now, will Maná get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Absolutely not. There is a snowball's chance in hell that this actually happens and they get inducted. Even a side category induction, I just could not see whatsoever. Because the truth is that if the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame wanted to go in a different direction with, you know, music from other countries being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they really wanted to kind of get a larger, more international audience to look towards their institution, then honestly, Fela Kuti might have been the best shot that they had with that, and frankly, they flubbed it. A lot of people were really excited about that nomination, a lot of people really supported it, and when they didn't get him inducted, it just kind of fell apart. I think that they really did just fumble with that opportunity there. And honestly, I think that if they really wanted people to, again, care about this nomination, they could have gone with an entirely different band from elsewhere in the world, or even from Mexico, that has more of a cult following that would be excited about it, because as it stands, I can't imagine that there would be too terribly many people in the United States that would be really hyped if a music institution in, I don't know, say Sweden, inducted Journey into their ranks, or inducted Motley Crue into their ranks, because while they are very popular bands, they're also bands that people really like, but never really say are their favorite band, or dedicate their entire life to following around, or know every single deep cut by. So, as a whole, it just doesn't really make sense to me, and there's no way that the voter base, as it stands, are going to vote for them. Artists who have roots in Latin America, or have some knowledge on Latin American music and music history, who that would be, I don't really know at this point, but they might vote for Maná, but that's a very, very small percentage, especially when most of the voter base sees Bad Company and immediately creams their jeans. So, I mean, do with that information what you will, but I don't think they have a chance in hell of getting in this year, or really ever, unless they get put in via some sort of side category, which I, again, can't see when there are already too many artists that people really expect to be inducted this year already. Too much for Maná to ever really fit into that particular slot in the yearly inductees list. And with that being said, that is the end of this entry in the Rock Hall Review series. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.